Hi, everyone, and welcome to Media Capital, a podcast where consumer investing meets media innovation. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Samantha Skey, CEO of SheMedia, a leading digital media company dedicated to amplifying women's voices and advancing conversations in health and tech and wellness. A passionate advocate for women's healthcare innovation, she has spearheaded initiatives like Flow, a digital and live media platform providing content and community in service of women's health. Under her leadership, SheMedia has become a powerhouse within Penske Media Corporation, reaching over 88 million monthly unique readers through platforms like She Knows, Blogger, and Stylecaster. With Penske's expansive reach, including ownership of iconic events like South by Southwest, Sam is at the forefront of reshaping how media empowers and informs women. And it's my pleasure to welcome Sam to the podcast. And I'm so excited to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you. Great to be here, Diana.
Where are you joining us from today?
Today I'm in Princeton, which is where I live now. Normally we are in Midtown Manhattan, where our New York headquarters for Penske Media is located.
And I know it's a very busy time for you, really exciting times, and really looking forward to the events. I'm sure we'll touch on that briefly during the podcast. But before we start going to business stuff, I'd really want to hear your story. I would love to know about your childhood, if you always knew that you're going to end up in media and how you
Mhm.
decided to join the industry.
Sure. One of the more formative things was probably playing sports, team sports typically, most notably soccer and lacrosse. And I feel like that was very meaningful in terms of learning to work with teammates and learning to try really hard and to hopefully learn to fail with grace. I'd say formative years. I had two brothers, a really wonderful home life, great parents, still do, very lucky. And then I went to college at Hamilton in upstate New York, very much a liberal arts school. And I say that because writing and reading were so important to our overall curriculum. I was a comparative literature major, and I think that the power of communicating in the written word was really hammered into my head quite young and an area that I really loved. So my assumption was not that I would go into media. My assumption was that I would go into publishing, which is at the time book publishing specifically. And that's where I started because I loved being in between the creative talent, the writer, and the reader or the audience who ultimately would benefit from that. Today, at She Media, that is a nice parallel to the way we work because we are able to represent so many incredible creators and writers and editors and influencers, thought leaders. It's particularly prescient right now as we prepare for South by Southwest because we have just an amazing array of talent joining us on stage. The idea that we can create these platforms to share those ideas that each of these creative people or academic or medical people bring, that opportunity to bring their thoughts and their research and perspectives to a larger audience is a lot like my early dream of kind of book publishing. You can do a lot more within the digital platform.
We'll talk a bit about your TED Talk as well, because it's a very interesting topic that you covered then a couple
Mhm.
of years ago. I didn't know about your passion for sports since you're growing up, and I think it's becoming a bit more clear now since you're a big advocate for women's healthcare
Mhm.
innovation. And this is also what She Media stands for. But I think you as an individual, you've been working on so many different initiatives. We talked about Flow in the introduction,
Mhm.
South by being around the corner. Where is that passion coming from? Is it just to do with sports and the fact that you like sports, or a defining moment in your career that made you think, oh, I do want to spend my time researching this subject?
I think that sports to me, and again, I'm not a sports expert, nor did I play competitively post college, but I think metaphors like that really work for me in considering impact in business. Metaphors such as the way a team dynamic can produce positive or negative outcomes, regardless of the actual talent on the field. We launched Flow with an eye toward inviting women to live in the present tense, which is a little more Buddhist thinking. And the Mikai Csikszentmihalyi concept of finding flow and existing in the sort of full immersion of present tense is one that I am always seeking. And I'm not a good meditator, but if I'm playing a sport, I can get there. If I'm surfing, I can get there to that real immersive space. I'd say sports in a way and the dynamics within both connect to our flow inspiration and clearly are a good model for understanding inequities, whether it's in coverage, pay inequity. I understand it's a business model and we have to increase fanship and viewership in order to really compete on pay equity. But it feels to me in some ways an area where women were adjacent to and modeled on a masculine version of the same thing. As with health, where until 30 years ago, we weren't even studying women, we were studying small men. Women were perceived to be difficult subjects because of hormones. The whole point is that there is this really interesting area of research within endocrinology, within hormone health. And so that was just left on the table, which to me, the ways in which society inadvertently or intentionally diverts attention from women is consistent through a bunch of different spaces, whether you're talking about athletes or patients or parents or women in business, entrepreneurs. So I think that my passion for social equity and for unified approaches to impact probably inspired a lot of what we do at SheMedia. I, again, never really intended specifically to go into media. It could have been more about working on health innovation directly or on, for example, women's sports structures and distribution. Yeah, so I think the thread is pretty strong. It just takes a minute to see it.
Yeah. But I think the power of media on amplifying a subject like this is
Mhm.
fantastic. And I don't think it's a coincidence. At MFG, we're running
Mhm.
a dedicated program for future advertisers to use brand advertising. There's been an influx of what we call fintech companies and conversations. It seems like we are seeing them a lot more. I mean, they were there for decades, but I
Yeah.
think it's also because media is providing that platform, right, to
Mhm.
make these ideas and these founders seen and heard in a way, which brings me to the conversation you had at TEDx Queen's Village 2 years ago. First of all, I would like to have you introduce the topic briefly to the
Mhm.
listeners, but what
Sure.
you talked about in that conversation, I think is still a very timely subject. How
Yeah.
we advertisers can best support minority owned media companies. And I think
Mhm.
it's coming also at a time when we find ourselves in a market where 60% of the ad spending goes into three major companies or it concentrated with three major companies, right? So
Mhm.
Facebook, Google, and Amazon. So the importance of diversity in media, I think, is only growing. Curious to know more about that topic and how you perceive that now 2 years forward.
I was really excited to support the woman who is producing. It was the first ever Queen's TEDx, and she's a long-term collaborator of ours and just a really strong person and entrepreneur. And so I suddenly realized that meant I had to write a TED Talk, do one. So I thought and thought about thinking, there's nothing I'm particularly expert in that's specific enough that an audience might want to hear it. And that wasn't like denigrating myself. It was more like being a generalist. But then I thought harder and talked to some friends, and an area where I do feel by necessity I've had to spend a lot of time and I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time is in how advertisers invest their money. And if you look at that as usually we think advertising is meant to be effective in driving sales. I agree. I have a big ad budget to spend to build our properties, and I can validate that the most effective ROI is likely going to come from a social platform that's driven entirely by algorithm. And that is not a bad thing. It's, again, highly effective, especially for small businesses. What that leaves out is the value of editorial integrity and learning and creating not just artistry, but real news in the world. The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Variety, one of our publications, might not be the best place in terms of immediate purchase behavior. Frankly, their articles are really deep and interesting, so you might not want to jump off of that content to buy lip gloss. That said, there are ways to drive the understanding with your consumers as an advertiser that you support high quality reporting that person, that end consumer, is spending money on or is spending their time on. So I see an advertiser in the New Yorker, for example, or here, The Atlantic. Amazing reporting. This piece by Ann Applebaum on Elon Musk is a must read. I can't go buy something and click on that, but I do
Yeah.
note in the back of my head who's in there, and that brand will be aligned in some deep place in my brain with not necessarily all my values, but will be aligned with a publication and a set of thought leaders who I really think should exist in the world. Whether I agree or disagree, that type of journalistic reporting is essential. So that's a long way to say that I think that if you're going only for the end ROI on a purchase and not contemplating the source of the information, who owns it, who owns that publication or that media platform or that event, and what types of people are being served by that. What is that series of content doing in terms of uniting or dividing people? And then you've got big press releases. I'm referring to many Fortune 500 companies who are saying, like, we believe in gender equity and racial equity, and we treat all of our employees with love and integrity. But yet we would never contemplate or even recognize what media companies were putting out of business by extracting 60% of the funding, essentially, and what content will no longer exist because the biggest advertisers are going for the quick hit of conversion and they're all in like arms races. I don't think that anyone's going to advertise based on purpose alone, but I think there's a way to work with content creators written large, the Olympics or the Oscars written in a smaller fashion. It might be a Substack from a really unbelievable journalist, that you can do both and that you can intertwine your purpose and your profit. You just have to be slightly more creative. And I don't think marketing is showing a lot of creativity, some of it by necessity. We're bottom line focused, all of that. So I feel the pain. And I think if you're smart, creative, curious, you can, as an advertiser, as a publisher, you can do better. Because without funding, we won't do deep reporting. We won't do high production value things and subscribers. If we only rely on subscribers or members to pay, then a lot of the world is not going to see the most important or the deepest content. Again, whether one agrees or disagrees with the point of view, I need to read different opinions in order to be informed. And if that content's not free because advertisers have withdrawn and the end user has to pay, far fewer people, and probably sometimes the people who have the least opportunity to find easily consumable content, those people will be reading something else. And
Yeah.
they're reading often nasty information that is not validated or sourced. So the talk is called Accountable Advertising and is focused on the ways in which advertisers and publishers can work together to ensure that the content that we believe should exist in the world is still funded without giving up any aspect of your bottom line performance.
And you anticipated my next question. You mentioned the subscription approach to funding and in a way supporting also I guess, the quality, not only the integrity, but the quality of content. I can immediately think about The Economist, for example. And there's
Mhm.
many other even publications owned by Financial Times, Sifted, for example, in the UK, that operates on a subscription basis. Can these two coexist? Can a media platform continue to be sustained by advertisers? Because that's what's been like for decades, right?
Yeah, I'm not anti-subscription model, and I think I now am spending more. I have different privilege than lots of people, but I am spending more with Substacks, and I'm subscribing to print editions of The Economist because I'm like, even if I don't want to read it, it's not going to show up in my feed because it's intense. I should read it. Like I know I'll be smarter. And likewise with podcasts, I try to listen to long form, provocative, challenging material, and I subscribe to some or I subscribe to the platform. So I think that there's a healthy mix that recognizes that people can't pay for all of their content and that there's some content you want them to be able to access that the world should maybe see, certain kinds of global health reporting. I don't want health content to be difficult to access for anyone. So I think the two really can coexist, and that gated content is not the worst model in terms of negative impact to access and equity. It's like there are deeper articles that I should pay for or I don't need to read. I appreciate the companies and the brands who allow for their most general market material to be ungated, and they don't just use it as a pull to drive membership or subscriptions. They use it as a place to put meaningful editorial out in the world. So I absolutely think the two can coexist and have. It's going to be hard. We're going to continue to lose a lot of publications and a lot of television format Video formats are a whole different conversation, but I'm thinking of
Yeah.
the core of journalism, which is usually reporting.
Exactly. The media landscape is changing so much. I think often in media, in press, you see a lot of negative headlines about the challenges, the rise of AI, all the ad blocking, all the ad frauds. We're basically doomed. But then on the other side, I think there's a lot of opportunity in terms of using first party data of customers
Hmm.
and doing better segmentation. I'm not going to ask about the challenges. I really want to make this conversation future looking and
Hmm.
optimistic because I think there's a lot of opportunities in digital publishing in terms of building new revenue streams or attracting new advertisers. Where do you see those opportunities, even for SheMedia?
We're playing with a lot of models right now because we are feeling the pressures as well. The model that was 70% advertising and that didn't have the challenge of AI is simply that you can summarize content, which is often how I read. The better apps can summarize a bunch of different sources. It's, I think, a far better experience than Google or search for me as a consumer because it's not crowded with a bunch of other material that might not be relevant. You can ask a specific question. So I use them both. I use them both. But that issue of both the search engines, Google in particular, and AI applications that they summarize information from various publishers, it means the publisher doesn't get the traffic or the credit and can't monetize at all. You get the benefit of contributing to an answer, which is something for sure, but you can't really pay for content that way. But I look at that as okay, so what are other ways we can use AI? Ultimately got so much potential for health access in particular. So I really like it for the world and can be curious instead of scared of it. I look at it to editors to get thought starters, but also I'm eager to be publishing perspectives next to AI and to say, this is a general answer. This is a personal story, perhaps. And how do we make that information visible? Because AI will endeavor to be objective, which is great. When certain material news you absolutely want objectively, there's other caveats and things that might come up of someone's experience with, for example, a disease. But I think that AI is going to be really meaningful in terms of identifying diseases, risk factors for many conditions and general disease. So we've been playing with how do you use some of the new tools in order to be more effective. And that's helpful to our productivity, but is not always beloved by our editors. It just feels like you're being undermined. That's a space of innovation and that is challenging. There's friction. We also e-commerce. And if we can make good, solid recommendations that we believe in that aren't just paid, but that our editors really that they like the product, they've tried the product, that can save time and you can hopefully save the mismatch of buying lots of stuff that ends up in the landfill. I use Wirecutter and love it as a source. Trusted opinions have great value when you're considering where to invest, whether you're investing in a couch or any other kind of fund. We're playing a lot with like thoughtful e-commerce. We have a really big event business, which seems old school to me sometimes. But when we have series, what I love is we'll do an event series, for example, on breast health, where there are multiple long form programming on different aspects of breast health. That might take place over the course of a month. And we have in studio time where we can go deeper and do deeper interviews with the experts. And we say science and stories. So both the experts and those perhaps who have a very personal relationship with breast cancer. So events as a lab for great content that you can also monetize and that you can also use as an impact driver. That's something I'm pretty excited about. And emails back as a really useful one-to-one connection. Now that emails understands that spam's not okay and that one-to-one connection, if you're delivering value, can be really positive and creating community. So sometimes the things we're experimenting with are actually things I did lots of in the 90s and early aughts. So those are some areas we're leaning into.
Yeah, we often say old media is new media. And I think what you described essentially, Sam, is the ability to create a full funnel with an opinion editorial at the top of the funnel and the emails and the direct call to actions and the ability to be more hyper targeted basically closes that funnel right that look. Speaking about different or let's say innovative ways of attracting new advertisers, we talked about this before. You've seen several publishers, maybe not so much yet in the US, but more outside of it, the Financial Times, Daily Mail, Times of India. They've started using their media assets essentially as a currency and support emerging brands by investing the advertising space in exchange for equity. Curious, what's your take on this model?
I think it's really interesting and does tie quite a bit to the concept of accountable advertising and of bonding the sort of entrepreneurial, higher risk side of our, business ecosystem with tried and true media models that have influence but are not endeavoring to influence specific outcomes within their investments, or they're not supposed to be doing that. So I think it's an ultimate example of an area where you can use the power of media to drive innovation in a way that you couldn't do inside of most media houses or media companies. Having been at several, the startups and large companies, it's very hard to build, impossible to build a new regimen or protocol for pelvic health for women while also publishing 100 units of content a day. You can cover that material, you can make space for it, but you're not going to be able to probably produce their science. Thinking about women's health in particular, I think it's a very interesting and meaningful use of the space and the audience you're generating. A lot of media is so short term focused right now, as we discussed. It's hard to think about longer term sometimes. But I think that if you have that ability to contemplate long term, it's a great use of something that could be of higher value to that space, meaning that media is probably of higher value to an up and coming brand that needs to generate awareness than it is to as value add to a Fortune 100 company. So there are all these different ways we use our inventory, if you will, which is our unit of value. It's our core atomic
Exactly.
unit of value. Yeah. And so we've discussed, but we generate and contribute quite a lot to the ad council media inventory. Likewise, a lot of the people who we get to put on stages meaning in conference halls or events, are indeed people we want to invest in. We want to invest in their research and what they're doing. So it's an extension of that that's more formal, where we're not taking equity, but it'd be cool if we could, because some of these scientists we're putting on stages are going to be really successful.
You alluded to long-term financial returns. It's just even beyond that, right? We ran a survey among fund managers that have used this model in the past, and 60% of them almost mentioned entry into new sectors. They were not existing advertisers with a publication that really led them to consider this model and use it. And
Mm.
I think especially covering or looking at specific topics like you mentioned, not just femtech, but maybe drilling a bit deeper into a specific topic of that
Yes, like
sector.
over ovarian
Yeah,
health, for example, and hormone health, absolutely. There are areas I would love to learn more and have skin in the game there. The skin we have right now as media platforms, the skin we have in the game is more like, will it drive traffic and interest? And then we can slip in things that we know won't drive traffic and that are going to be really specific and of great value to 20 people, and that's part of our mission. But I think it's a quite a logical model. I wonder how people get involved in that, but also do the diligence. Like due diligence is for us when we look at M&A is just really time consuming. So a lot of the investments we don't make are probably due to the labor involved.
absolutely. This is a much longer conversation, I'm sure, but I think it has sometimes a lot to do with the DNA of the company. I think
Mm,
Penske
true.
Media in of itself is a very innovative brand that was built by acquiring media houses and got to where the company is today by having multiple publications involved. I want to go into the shout out section. This is a core section for us. We would like to invite you to think of somebody that made an impact on yourself. Could be a friend, could be a colleague, it could be an investor or a mentor, and why. So, who would you like to give a shout out to?
So I will shout out Courtney Nichols Gould, who is indeed one of my very closest friends now, but we started out working together in the 90s at a startup. It was an interactive gaming company called Interactive Imaginations. It went on to do really cool things by merging with other companies. I think she was my boss. I'm just trying to think, or at least was senior to me. And I would say, in terms of why was this person impactful, it's because she was so driven and unabashedly curious and a learner and a tough manager, not always easy at all, but so profoundly entrepreneurial. And she has gone on to do amazing things and to sell a great big brain health vitamin company to Unilever. And so I think the perseverance element, so it's the passion, the perseverance, and underpinning it all, there is, just to add another P, there's a purpose element. She's also the biggest advocate for her friends and colleagues. And used to, when I was like 27, would introduce me without thinking she was telling an untruth. She would say, Sam's the president of the company. She's like designing this and writing that. It was not true, but in her head, it was true, I think. Probably not, but it's good to have somebody who believes that you're that good. And she's taken all the hits that women in business take, often sometimes by our own design or actions, sometimes unfairly, usually a mix, and withstood them in a way. So my shout out would be to somebody who's got grit component, but also the drive and ultimately has had unbelievable success.
I think it's so important to have that level of support when you're getting started. It shapes your principles, your values.
Well,
I have similar stories as well. Normally, we look at learnings that our guests have acquired over the lifetime. What would be one big learning from spending your entire career pretty much in media and also being the CEO of SheMedia?
there's so many, and I think I'm not done at all. And it's probably starting to have much more conscientious learning because when I was younger, I thought I knew everything. I think I know nothing now. An important learning for me is to allow failure to occur without it being an epic disaster or without maybe even letting it cloud your head as a failure and instead to think of it as productive learning, maybe disappointing because you were wrong about something. Your math was ended up not working out. And so to allow those to happen at the right time. So not to go down with the ship screaming necessarily, because that tends to hurt your business more, in my experience, and hurts people more, but rather to say, okay, it's all right. It doesn't mean you're a failure. It means that the thing you took a bet on didn't work out. And the more bets you have, I think, out in the world, the easier it is to accept that there are some wins and losses. But so earlier in my career, I was defined by the wins and losses in a way that was not productive. So I'd say that would be accepting that if you have lots of ideas and lots of experience and take risks, it's quite likely that some will not work out as you imagined.
I agree. And I go through that battle very often. I think also it's something to do with the stage you're at, I guess, in your life. And
Yeah,
as you go through it, you build a lot more resilience. And I
I
think you get to
agree. I
appreciate what is really a challenge and what is something that, what I'm just going to find a solution for. Sam, we're going to wrap up with what we call the lightning round. It's a quick fire round of questions, very short. I will get started with the first one. Actually, it's a nice transition to what you just said. What advice would you give to your young self?
Oh dear. I've been asked that. It's supposed to be fast, to chill out and to recognize that the failures are not your definition of your whole identity, to get more sleep, to wear sunscreen. I did this, but I would reaffirm hold on to your best friends, your good friends, the people who make you better, and ensure that you have that troop of people who give you advice and fortify you in different areas of your life. And don't feel bad about investing in that, or don't deprioritize that because it doesn't seem like it's the thing that's getting you ahead. I did not wear sunscreen and I smoked. Don't smoke.
I would take your advice on sleep. I'm still getting there. What would be your tip for young women interested in building a career in publishing or media?
This I get a lot also because I love working with young women and I think a lot about what I wish I'd known because I think I just went for it and I had very little plan. One piece of advice I give is make sure that where you work, it doesn't have to be the logical resume step. But whatever work you're doing, whether it's independent or within a company, a big company, a small company, try really hard to contemplate who you're surrounded by. So, what is the environment and will you learn? People aren't going to sit down and tutor you. I have to always remind Gen Z of that. That's not their job. Your job is to make their job easier and to contribute productively and to bring new ideas. You need to learn in order to do that, of course, but find the place where if you're entrepreneurial, where you can have access to people you can learn from, and there's a learning environment. Don't worry if it's Walt Disney or it's the Starbucks down the road. That might be a little extreme, but don't worry if it matches up perfectly on your resume. Go with the place where you can learn and where people will be mentoring you on something, because you may just end up weeding things out, which is fine too. It doesn't have to follow a perfect path.
And Sam, the last question, what's the most counterintuitive thing that you've learned running a media business?
Probably it's not counterintuitive anymore, but that profit and purpose don't always line up perfectly. So being purpose-minded might end up being unable to actually have an impact. That actually seems quite intuitive to me now, but I remember when it wasn't. And then sadly with media, that quality is in conflict with the model. That's probably the most challenging thing inherently. Doesn't mean you can't work it out. That's where I'm saying we have to be creative. But quality, insofar as quality reporting, takes time, it's expensive. So that's a macro. There's lots of examples where we could say that's not the case. Like a high quality personal story, it might be cheap to produce, but the quality is not necessarily aligned with a high profit target.
This is a subject worth of South by South panel discussion. I'm
It
sure
is.
there will be loads on that.
There are some. We have some
Yep.
great media, future of media. We have Scott Galloway talking about the way that media and content is progressing and influence is progressing. So yeah, we have a lot of great people, a lot of great journalists on stage.
The Pivot podcast is one of my favorite.
I have to admit, I'm like a total disciple. It's weird because with podcasters, you know so much about them. And it feels creepy when you actually meet them. Like, Kara Swisher, oh my God, I know your son Louis.
I know
And
everything about you.
podcasts are quite intimate
Thanks so
pleasures.
much, Sam. It's been a pleasure and look forward to South by South. It's going to be an amazing event, I'm sure.
Look forward to seeing you.
Likewise. Thank you so much. If you're as passionate about consumer investing and brand advertising as we are, don't forget to follow the pod, leave a review, and check out more content at mediaforgrowth.com.
MFG invites you to the inaugural London Investors Breakfast, an exclusive gathering for top investors and media industry leaders on April 3rd. Join us for high-impact networking, insights on growth opportunities, and a unique breakfast experience designed to spark collaboration and fresh ideas. This invite-only event has limited spots. To register, email Diana at mediaforgrowth.co with your details.